Welcome everyone to the FCAN webinar, Country Roads Take Me to College, meeting the unique needs of rural students. I am today's host, Kathy McDonald, Assistant Director for the Florida College Access Network. On today's call, I'm thrilled to welcome our guest presenter, Dreama Gentry, who is the Executive Director of Partners for Education at Berea College's Educational Outreach into Appalachian, Kentucky. Partners for Education supports the educational aspirations of 50,000 students across Eastern Kentucky using an annual budget of $40 million. An Annie Casey Children and Family Fellow, Gentry also serves on the board of directors for the FAHI, a community development nonprofit, and the Pine Mountain Settlement School. She is a member of the Equity Coalition convened by the Pritchard Community Committee for Academic Excellence, which seeks to ensure Kentucky's school accountability system provides educational excellence to all students. Recently, she organized the annual Rural College Access and Success Summit, an event that brings together approximately 400 participants from all across the country to improve the educational opportunities available to students from rural communities. Gentry holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Berea College and a Juris Doctor from the University of Kentucky. Also sharing her expertise today is guest presenter Sarah White, who is the Director of Partners for Education programs. She has worked for the last 25 years in higher education as an instructor, counselor, and federal programs administrator. Currently, as a member of the Partners for Education team, she leads the work of 4 college and career access and success projects through Gear Up at Berea College. With a focus on continuous improvement and the results of all Appalachian students succeed, Sarah is ensuring college and career success for over 15,000 students in 41 southeastern Kentucky counties. She also engages nationally to raise awareness and examine best practices for rural students' achievement across the P through 12 educational pipeline. Now, a few housekeeping items to get us started. We are so thrilled to have you all joining us today. Please feel free to submit your questions in the question box that is in your dashboard. If you're not seeing the question box, you might see an orange arrow on the right side of your screen. Just click on that, your dashboard will show up, and click on the little triangle that's next to questions. So go ahead and submit your questions at any time there. We'll allot time at the end of today's webinars to respond to your questions. Second, we'd love for you to be sharing what you're learning on social media. You can find us at FL College Access on Twitter. And if you can use the hashtag FCAN on whatever platform you're using, that way we can find you. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. All materials will be available within a week of the recording. Now, I know quite a few of you are dialing in from other states and may not know FCAN, so just very briefly, the Florida College Access Network is the heart of a movement to ensure today's students are prepared for tomorrow's jobs. Our mission is to create and strengthen a statewide network that catalyzes and supports communities to improve college and career preparation, access, and completion for all students. Our vision is to see at least 60% of working age Floridians holding a high quality post-secondary degree or credential by the year 2025. We do our work in 3 primary ways. FCAN publishes research and data on evidence-based practices and policy opportunities to strengthen Florida's talent pool. Through our local college access networks, we now have 17 of them, representing 82% of the state's population. These organizations are made up of community leaders who come together to create solutions and partnerships to support local talent development. And finally, FCAN coordinates 4 College Ready Florida initiatives that support students in continuing their education beyond high school. Now, to get us started today, I wanted to give us all a snapshot of rural students in Florida. For those of you who are logging in from other states, if you'd like to find your statewide data, you can access the same report that was put out by the Rural School and Community Trust, Why Rural Matters, the 2018-2019 version. To get us started, while Florida has fewer schools and students in rural communities versus the national average, we have considerably more students living in our rural communities when compared to other states, given the size of our state. We have a higher percent of rural school-age students living in poverty, and our rural communities are considerably more diverse than the national average. Our rural student graduation rates are lower than that average, and our students living in rural communities move around more, to the tune of at least 1 in 8 students in our rural communities moving in just the last year. Fewer of our rural students are taking advantage of dual enrollment. That might be an access issue. But some of the bright spots, our rural juniors and seniors are passing at least one AP exam and nearly double at nearly double the national average. And the percent of juniors and seniors taking the ACT or SAT is 10 points higher than the national average. Unfortunately, our degree attainment still lags in rural communities versus our non-rural communities, which is why we're enjoying all of you to join us today to learn more about how we can help all of our students succeed. And with that, let me please welcome Dreama to share what they're learning through their Partners for Education model. Dreama, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for having us here to share our model and what we're doing with rural schools and rural communities. The Florida and the Florida data is telling as far as some of the challenges. When we think nationally, we always start with rural is important. You cannot discount rural places, rural communities, and rural students. And I think we don't need to belabor this point with this group because the folks who have joined us here today are here because they know rural is important. I think the other piece to really consider is that rural is often forgotten. If you'll go to the next slide. When we think of the work that Partners for Education is doing, we've been doing this work for around 20 years, and we do it in Appalachian, Kentucky, and Appalachia, which is predominantly rural. And we realized a few years ago with the 2016 election that people were starting to talk about rural America and maybe remember that it's there and think about interacting with rural, but they weren't doing it in an asset-based way. And so we stepped into this saying, we need to share what we're doing nationally and start pulling rural practitioners together nationally. So rural is forgotten often by philanthropy. We often see federal policies, federal programs have an unconscious rural bias. As we think about competing in discretionary grant programs, like Gear Up programs, things like that, often the readers do not have a rural background. And so when they're reading rural applications and seeing large funding amounts for transportation, they're like, well, that you don't need to do that, right? So that unconscious bias can often impact the funding that comes into rural schools and rural communities. Federal programs like EIR that really focuses on scaling up and replicating evidence-based practices and programs have a bias against rural places because if you look at what works clearinghouse, there's very few interventions and programs there that have actually been tested in rural places. I think there's also this national perception that rural areas, rural people, rural leaders lack the capacity and the best practices to solve their own problems. And what we think and we believe is that rural people have access. We have the ability to solve the problems. What we run into is lack of access. And so this slide really summarizes when we think of access in rural places and as far as college access and attainment, access to qualified teachers, access to out-of-school learning with transportation. There is so many access issues that our rural students and schools face every day. And what we have to do is figure out how do we address the access issues because we know our rural students are as bright as students from anywhere. And so these are 6 of the access areas that Partners for Education is focused on. And it's interesting, access to broadband is one. Sarah and I both live in a town, just a few miles out of a town, but we had to drive to our office today to make sure that we had broadband access that wouldn't drop during this presentation. So it's a real issue. And I think we can go to our next slide, which is our post poll.
It is. So let me pull that up. Here we go. Okay. So the poll is which access issue is most critical in your communities? And if you don't see your most critical issue listed, go ahead and share in the question box what yours might be. And thank you to Dory, who shared Gear Up Maine has conducted a 3-year active research pilot in rural Maine. Thank you for letting us know about that. That's great. Okay, let's give it about another couple of seconds before I close that out. Okay, Broadband's in the lead here. And let me share those results with you all. So as you can see, 29% broadband access is the lead contender. Out of school learning with transportation at 22, 21% teacher quality and rigorous courses, and then trailing behind are the remaining two. Now, what I'm seeing coming in the question box is college going culture is also critical, but hard to choose just one. Yep, that's a biggie. Very good. Okay, let me go ahead and hide that. And we'll move on to the next slide.
Great, thank you. So Partners for Education, we're part of Berea College, so we're part of a post-secondary institution. We sit at the edge of Appalachia here in Kentucky, and we focus our direct work, our learning, our impact on Appalachian Kentucky, but we also support partners and networks nationally to move the dial on rural student achievement nationally, because we know that as rural students go, Appalachia goes. And so we can help our Appalachian region by shining a light on Appalachia and rural America as a whole. You can go to the next slide. So when we think of the work that we do, it really is around all Appalachian students succeed, all students succeed. So we do our work cradle to career, and we define success as earning a 2 or 4 year degree. And we define success this way because we know that this is the surest path to leading a healthy, fulfilled, and choice-filled life. It's interesting, if you look at data around health outcomes, happiness outcomes, economic mobility, even longevity of life, those with college degrees have better outcomes. And so as we do our work, and we're working cradle to career, everything we do ties into college access and success. You can go to the next slide. When we do our work in rural places, we realize there's 3 big barriers. The first is in rural America, you have a programming gap. I think one of the access issues that was highlighted earlier was access to out-of-school learning and with transportation. And what we find throughout Appalachian Kentucky, we have our school districts that are really working to support students as they prepare for college. But we really don't have the type of organizations you would have in an urban place, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the United Ways, the after-school providers, those kind of things. So what we've had to do is work with our school districts and step into the space of filling those programming gaps. We also find in rural places that many of our schools, especially the small schools, they work on a shoestring. And so you don't have opportunities for teachers to be trained in rigorous curriculum. There's often not training and support for the principals in becoming data-driven and those things. So professional development and the capacity of the leaders is essential. There's also the capacity to do all of the work because they're so short-staffed. And then the third area is that in rural places like urban places, systems and sectors are not aligned around the child. We find that, we know that a young person coming to school will not be successful if they're hungry or if they don't know where they're going to sleep that night. But in our rural places, like in urban places, the education systems are often not aligned with the housing sector and the health sector, the other sectors. And then also, as we mentioned before, there's just not the funding coming into rural places to do that alignment. The next slide. So what we've done at Partners for Education is 90% of our time and our energy is focused on implementing programs, cradle to career, to support young people. We also, through those programs, are building capacity in our teachers, our principals, our parents, our students, and our community members. So we're also focused on aligning systems and bringing other dollars and other resources into a community, forming leadership tables where communities work together to think about how they're going to support young people. So in an urban place, you would find multiple organizations doing that. But I often say that people that work in rural America, we don't have the luxury of just doing one thing. We have to do all things. And I'm sure the folks on the phone that do rural college access and success in their communities can probably identify with that. Not only do you have to help the child think about signing up for the ACT, but you may also have to be linking that family to a food bank and really working to help the child who's couch surfing figure out how do they wash their clothes so they can go and be present. So we have to do all of those things when working with women. Next slide. And the cradle to career piece, we think it's essential, and I think it's natural fit for rural places. When you think of preparing a young person for college success, we know we have to start earlier than high school. I think we have to start as early as we can. We actually have home visiting programs that we run in partnership with Save the Children, where we have home visitors who are community members who go into a home to help the parent start working on language development with their baby. And then we work K through 12, also work with post-secondary, adult ed, and those things. So I think it's important when you work in rural places that you think about working with the whole family and the child from the time they enter the community until the time they go and move into meaningful employment. And a lot of times, once they move into meaningful employment, that's also when they become parents themselves. And so we're doing this, and we're starting to see that generational piece where we're working now with the children of the students who came through our system. So I'll turn it over to Sarah. Oops, no, I'm not. I'm talking about impact. So our impact, go to the next slide. So the work we do in Appalachia, often people say you can't really go to scale in Appalachia or in rural places. And so in our region, we're serving 50,000 young people across 47 school districts. This is just a micro 8-county region where we're serving over 50% of all young people. And we're doing it through pulling together multiple federal programs because we found that we can compete with federal discretionary grant programs. And like I said, philanthropy has not been focused on serving in rural places. And we're hoping that changes in the future. And so this shows sort of how we do the work, the type of programs we do. And it's important that all of our programs, programs may come and go, but what remains is the focus on all Appalachian students succeed. And what remains is this idea that, we have to make sure that kids are ready for school at all grade levels. So it's that the cradle to career piece and the focus on all kids' success remains. Programs will come and go. Next slide. We've seen the impact on population level data. So when we track the success of Partners for Education, we're not tracking the success of the kids who are enrolled in our programs. We're tracking the success of grade levels of all kids who live within our place. So when we looked at those same 8 counties, all third graders proficient in reading, we've seen significant increase in reading and math of our third graders over the course from 2013 to 2019. And we're now surpassing the state average. And honestly, that's wonderful, but it's still really sad that only 48% of our third graders are ready and proficient in math by third grade. So again, it's working and not tracking just the kids who we serve in our programs. These are all the kids who live in our place. Next slide. We can also see the impact we have by looking at our partners. And so this is Leslie County, and we've worked in Leslie County since 2012. When we started working there, 8th grade proficiency was at 47%. This last year, it was at 74%. High school graduation rate significantly increased. The school's ranking at the high school moved from 224th in the state to 16th in the state. And so I think it's key to point out here that this is not just because of the Partners for Education programs, but it's also because of our systems approach of working with the school on how they can engage multiple stakeholders to come in and partner with the school district and provide multiple services to the kids and the teachers. And so once we see schools starting to engage and bringing in multiple partners, I think that's when we see these increases. And so Leslie County has been a great partner with us, mainly because they've just been open to collaboration with us and with other entities and other partners. So that's the big picture of what we do. Sarah's going to sort of hone in on what we do with students and our college access and success model. So I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Dreama, and thank you, Kathy, for having us today. Before you can understand our model, you really have to understand our history. As a staff doing this work, we are primarily from the region we serve. Most of us are first-generation students and have experienced firsthand the power of having hope and of someone believing in us before we saw it in ourselves. So we've never lost sight of our students, the individual children that we serve. They're the ones in the small community K through 12 schools and the ones who travel to consolidating buildings sometime for hours on a school bus each day. They're the reason we know they can be successful regardless of the inequities that are out of their control. So the three photos on the screen now represent three of the strongest themes in our work, and we'll unpack those themes in the following slides. This first picture is an introduction to Gear Up, and Gear Up is a federally funded program, and it really is the framework that we've developed to serve all middle school students through high school graduation. The event that you see is a commitment from us, the staff, as to what students can expect from us along the way. It's time intensive and it takes a lot of energy and preparation. We travel to each of those little K through 12 schools and the consolidated building, and we offer them a road show. We explain to them who we are and that we'll be there for the next 7 years. We ask them what their goals are. We ask them if anyone mentors in their life. It's part pep rally, part information, and just a lot of sharing of their ideas. The second photo is really our commitment in action. Here we're engaging a family, and for us, families often look, I'm sure, the same way they do to many of our viewers today, untraditional, but totally committed. We have a lot of grandparents as parents in Appalachian, Kentucky, and so here we are working with a family on dreaming. And then the last picture you see is a celebration that we offer to all the students 6 years after the roadshow. It's our senior send-off, and it's really a take on the signing day for the entire senior cohort at that time. So there are over 3,000 students in that arena, and it's filled with video messages from college presidents, their current college students from their hometown, mascots and cheerleaders all over the floor. They're welcoming them to the next level of the journey. We also subliminally put in that message about, you know, you still have time, to those in the room who may not have made a decision. The senior send-off is one example of our work at scale. We have about 2,500 to 3,000 students in the high school senior year at one time. Kathy, please feel free to move that slide. So what does our work look like with over 50,000 students and families from 47 school districts? It's definitely not just the big events and parties all the time or even every year. While we do mark milestones like middle to high school transition and high school graduation with flair, we've never lost the sight of one caring adult and the power that that person can bring into a student's life. Even at scale, we followed the research as well as our qualitative feedback, and we believe it's the caring individual who sees something in the students that makes a difference. The primary person whose role is to show up every day and be our students' advocates in faculty meetings, on board committees, and in their everyday life. And the earlier that we can get this relationship to begin, and the more planning that we can do toward our ultimate result of college success and graduation, the more solid that we've seen it play out in folks' lives. Next slide. So here are strategies that we use that help rural students prepare for life after college. We believe that the caring individual must have these strategies to begin their work. Our funding cycles indicate that we have a finite amount of time to make a difference. So we don't allow for a lot of autonomy with some of our staff or with our stakeholders. We've designed our program strategies around research. They fit into 4 large buckets, which, you know, at first glance really isn't rocket science. But the themes are woven throughout all of our projects. Regardless of the funding stream, you would find this work happening in any of our Partners for Education grants. In total, Partners for Education is doing the work with about 720 people, but the majority of those are working in communities and schools we serve. We have over 630 place-based staff, and they're charged with lifting the aspirations of our students, families, and sometimes even the school and community culture. They build our students' academic skills. They connect their everyday activities, including the mundane and seemingly unnecessary, to a larger vision of college and career aspirations. And then we also engage the families as partners. The next slide. So here's our lifting education aspirations model broken down. The navigators, which you see in the second section of boxes at the top, their charge is to create clear college messaging and to serve in a guidance counselor role if guidance counselors got to do the job they envisioned as college, sophomore, and freshman students. Our mentoring program, our structured mentoring, begins with a cohort application in classrooms at the middle school. Then it moves on to a caseload and a club model as they move from middle school to high school. It's at the middle school that students begin to determine the level of mentors necessary for the student to be successful. Many students are positioned with coaches, club sponsors, or teachers. So we really focus hours on the students without a clear connection. In high school, if they have the time and interest, these opportunities lead to a group called Promising Appalachian Leaders in Service, or PALS. And those students are a true cross-section of our cohort, and they inform our work and they inform the work of other agencies on a national level. Last week, we had 3 seniors participate in a national webinar through one of our partners around resilience education, 6 ways to create resilience and equity. Next slide, please. So when you look at our building academic skills, we have staff that are academic interventionists, and they're tasked with monitoring the academic performance of students on a granular basis. They provide intensive tutoring during the school day and work alongside a teacher or a team of teachers. Our role in their training and supervision is in partnership with the principal at their school. Their time isn't spent on planning college awareness events or partnering with other school agencies such as guidance counselors or resource teachers nearly as much as the navigators do. They're hired for their expertise in getting students to benchmark on our state testing standards. Because we're rural, we find rigor a challenge and do partner with other agencies to offer dual credit and AP work. Without our assistance, AP would be too costly for most of our districts to implement. They often don't have the qualified staff or a cohort number of students to enroll. Dual credit is offered through our regional colleges, and it provides our students the opportunity to leave high school with sometime upwards of a 2-year degree of class hours. Thank you. Connecting college and careers. In rural America, and especially in the Appalachian communities, opportunities to be mentored by folks outside of healthcare, the school districts that they go to school in, first responders, and some of our small business leaders is rare. We don't have STEM experiences, there's no research going on, and any of the opportunities outside of our funding for summer opportunities is just non-existent. But to ensure that we are spending our summertime and our out-of-school time with pertinent activities, we use student-level data. We train the academic interventionists and also the navigators so that they're able to use interest inventory, skill level data, and what we have found as the information around the ACT to determine the appropriate interventions that we offer. I think also I'd probably be remiss here if I didn't talk about our long-time work and the work with the early grades. We've been doing this work since 1999 through the federal funding of Gear Up. And while a lot of our other grants do many different things, it's really provided partners an opportunity to set a framework on K through 12 around college awareness and access. So we've been changing some of the cultures, and I'd like to share just a few of the things that our schools do for students that's really no cost and low cost as early as kindergarten. They will do a college adoption where each class will select a different school, and they'll decorate the doors. They'll have classroom pep rallies and root for that team for the upcoming game on Saturdays. They'll also research that particular college for the time that they have adopted it. Faculty and staff members outside their homeroom doors will put up "About Me" posters, or they'll, if they're not in the classroom, they may post them outside their office, or the maintenance guys may post them outside of their area. The college work, the cafeteria workers may have them outside the cafeteria, and it will include their degrees or where they would like to go to college. It'll have flags from the alma maters, and then we allow them to, or we don't, but we've encouraged the principals, and find we have great success with allowing college sweatshirt days on the casual Fridays. And so you see lots of bright colored sweatshirts in the fall, especially around the football season and the basketball season in Kentucky. Many of the leadership clubs and teachers have learned that if you send requests to admissions offices for swag, they will send you so much stuff that a lot of our cafeterias look like advertisements for a college fair because so many flags are hung there. Kathy, you can go to the next slide. So engaging families, we've had a long-term practice. When we engage our families, we work with them, we introduce ourselves to them almost from the executive director level. So as they come in as 6th and 7th graders, regardless of the funding stream that we're serving them under, they get to know the leadership, and they get to know a lot of the cross-section of the folks that run PFE. So as a result of that, we often conduct focus groups, and we send out surveys that we get some pretty amazing survey return rates and honesty in those focus groups about. And I think one of the most compelling survey findings result from a question around, do you think your child will go to college? Approximately 96% of those families agree when the students are in middle school. That percentage drops fairly significantly at the 10th grade, and it's the lowest when students reach their senior year. So through our own research and just some of the best practice readings that we've done, we believe that a lot of that goes back to the financial messaging that parents are receiving around aid. It just becomes more cumbersome, harder to understand. Don't reach out for some of our staff to help them with the forms. We do things, we've engaged with local banks to come in and set up different kind of accounts, and to offer all kinds of just, you know, breaking finances down for a family to understand. The second piece of that, we think, is the rigor of coursework increases. Students and parents begin to doubt the long-term educational plan that they may have thought was just going to be theirs at the 8th grade. So we work with the parents to become advocates for their students. We want to offer opportunities for them to understand the state testing accountability efforts. We want them to understand the pathways that the local school systems are using in their curriculum, and the graduation requirements that Kentucky has mandated. We also work to create opportunities early on around financial literacy, so that when they get to the FAFSA, that's the last piece of a long-range plan. Thank you. You can go ahead now. So the next part, Dream and I are both going to share how our work has not changed, but the way that we're doing it looks differently. And I sit back over to Dreama.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I guess I would say, you know, as Sarah is walking through what we do, it's important to note that we are doing this at scale now, but we started out in one school district in 1999, working with that school district, thinking 6th grade through college success. Sarah and I started working together, the two of us, in 2005, starting to think about how do you do this in 5 school districts and 5 counties and 7 school districts. So it really is the same work that we were doing back then. We're just empowering others to do it across multiple school districts and multiple counties. And it's great to think about that, because it does show that what happens and needs to happen in rural places can be scaled and replicated. So just like all of you on the phone, our world shifted with COVID-19, and we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about sharing how we're adjusting and innovating and ensuring that our students and families and communities are still at the forefront. So my work, a lot of the work I do is still how do we influence systems and funding. So in this time of COVID-19, how do we ensure that as federal partners and policymakers are thinking of economic recovery, how are they how are we making sure that they're thinking of the needs of rural schools and rural students? And so much of my time is working with collaboratives across the country to ensure and to try to influence and to make sure that rural is on the mind as people are doing that. You know, we've seen funding come out in one of the first stimulus packages. I can't remember if this was the first one or the second, that was only eligible for communities of 500,000 or more, right? And so how do we make sure that they're also thinking about small places and small schools? One of the things we've realized is that there's not a lot of, that we need to be collecting the stories of our students, our teachers, our guidance counselors, our parents, and really get their true stories of what it is like doing this remotely from home. So in Kentucky, Kentucky had non-traditional instruction. Most of our school districts had permission to do non-traditional instruction, which for a lot of districts, it included sending packets home for kids with worksheets. And we're talking seniors and juniors getting packets with worksheets. How is that working for kids? What needs to change? What are the real barriers? And so we're collecting a lot of the stories and the qualitative data to share with those policymakers and funders. I think the other piece is that often school districts, rural communities do not have the bandwidth to be serving their students in this time of crisis, and also think about applying for funding or even thinking about how to use the dollars that they do have. And so a lot of our work has been around coaching and working with superintendents and school leaders and helping them to navigate this cycle in this system. Next slide. And some of this I just talked about. So it's also thinking about the capacity of the educators. Of course, we're concerned about the students that we are not connecting with, that do not have broadband and do not have virtual access. We have staff that are actually working with students by sending packets to their houses. We have staff that are doing phone calls to groups of students, and we have others that are doing Zoom. When this first happened, we talked, Mike Hogg, who's our chief operating officer, he's a former superintendent. He immediately set up phone calls with each of those 47 superintendents to say, what can we do as Partners for Education to help you and to assist with this? What he learned and what he heard is they didn't want programs and they wanted nothing new. They're saying our teachers need support in reaching these students. Our students need a caring adult to connect with to help them through this. And so most of our focus has been around how do we take the people we have in the field, use whatever we can. Some of it's mailing packets and letters home, and then kids will mail things back to us, but use whatever is existing to form that relationship. We also realized that parents were being inundated with resources. And I'm sure you guys, if you're on mailing lists, it seemed like suddenly every vendor had the solution to the problem, right? That they could sell us a solution that would suddenly make it possible for kids to learn remotely. And parents were feeling that too. So we repurposed a website that had been focused on parent engagement to really be a cradle to career place where parents of a middle schooler could go and see what's the best free resources for math, English language arts, health and wellness, and college planning. We also included a whole platform of pages that were all in Spanish for those families that had limited English. And so that website is partnersforappalachianfamilies.org, and it's actually www. I've got an extra W in my slide here. But if you want to see that website, and it's a place that simplifies it for parents, and it says these are the best 5 free things that we think can help you do that non-traditional instruction with your children. Next slide. And so Sarah will share how we've innovated around our programming and how programming looks a bit differently now.
So I'm excited to share this because it's really about the stories that I've been hearing. I spent the most of last week and the week before on Zoom calls with the folks doing the work, just to gather some of the more energetic and also sometimes more of the hard work that they're doing. The North Star hasn't changed, and I was glad to see early on, we went into this, I think, March the 16th. Our governor in Kentucky was on the call the middle of March, very early on with their districts, telling those superintendents that they should be ready to shut down and go to non-traditional instruction with a 72-hour notice. Most of, I'll take just a brief second here, the concept of non-traditional instruction, NTI, in Kentucky was really built around the snow days that we have. And because we're rural, the roads are sometimes impassable for school buses for up to 3 to sometimes a full week of school with kind of inclement weather, but not the winters that my family remind me we used to have back in the 70s. Just normal snowfalls and the ice doesn't melt for a couple of days. So during the fall, when the school year begins and students send home paperwork, there are non-traditional instruction packets included for up to 10 days. And they are just work that can be completed at home without any type of resource. It was never designed to carry us through the environment that we've been in since mid-March, but it was the best we had. So the Kentucky schools, on one hand, were able to mobilize fairly quickly because we didn't have even inclement weather in Kentucky this year, and they begin with 10 days of NTI instruction sent home in the fall. So most of them had someplace between 5 to 7 days of work already available. And so we went into this NTI time quickly. And when we did, it changed everyone's work. But we were prepared to tell our staff, you know, the North Star is still the same. We are still ensuring all of our students succeed. We didn't need to share that. They were on that day one. And so when I think about lifting aspirations, activities used to involve, you know, mentoring after school or a club that would meet together at lunch. And I think now we've got some scenarios where we are really leaning into Facebook Live with 2 or more teachers, or we're uploading videos that can be looked at later on either Facebook or some other social media platform. And we're giving students challenges, and then they do the challenge and upload it. And 2 of my favorite challenges, one was turn your home into a college campus. And there's just a student who goes around her home and she calls the laundry room the residence hall place. You know, she just has it, she's nailed it. And out in her backyard, she calls that the wellness center. And so she just takes you on this tour of her house using every room in her house with college terminology. And then the second one, another challenge they had, was to interview their parents as a potential college roommate. So again, we're just lifting their aspirations, giving them new ways to learn more about a world that they don't yet live in at a college campus. For building academic skills, it doesn't involve standing in a classroom or working with a student in small groups, but I've listened to interventionists tell me about receiving text at 11:30 at night with a new baby in the house. The students or the staff is convinced that our students have their days and nights mixed up and will never be able to rise again for a normal school day because they continue to get text for math help or about writing an essay very late at night. The most intense work around college and career connections right now is really using our texting platform. We are with a company called Signalvine, and we had an intense summer melt program that we always used with our seniors. Research shows that for rural students that are first generation, they can have everything in place. Housing acceptance, they can be accepted into the college of their choice. So we're not even talking students who are going with lower benchmark scores. Some of our smartest and brightest students will melt in the summer, and that's without the COVID-19 that we're dealing with this year. So we have an intense campaign with texting to work on that issue. We've also built in other texting messages that go to other students. We've been really clear that we want to separate the groups so that those students who we want to reach with summer melt aren't getting the messages that we just send to say, hope you had a good week, or, you know, tomorrow's Friday, hang in there with your NTI work one more day, because we do not want to cause texting fatigue. And I'm so excited to tell you about a little bit of our family work. There's 2 scenarios. There's this story of this mom who every night would take a picture of her student doing the NTI packet and then take a photograph of the actual completed page on her phone. When she gets to work the next day, she uses her lunch hour to upload those pictures from her phone onto the Facebook Messenger of our college and career navigator, who then downloads and prints those and sorts them into either electronic files or is able to get them to school to be put in each individual's teacher's file. And the other one is the story of her grandmother who called the College and Career Navigator and said, can you help me with this Google Classroom? That's another platform that is used throughout all districts in Kentucky. They've been going to that for about the last 5 years. So most of our educators, most of our school systems have been sending updates through Google Classroom and just Google Docs prior to this. And we found that a lot of students used it, some didn't. But for those that didn't, you could catch them in the hallway the next day. So there's been some additional pushes through our districts to work with Google Classroom. And this grandmother said, the words just look jumbled to me. She brought the sheet, the stapled sheet home about how to do it, but I can't follow these directions. And as a disclaimer, I'm not sure Sarah could follow those directions either. I'm not completely computer savvy. I click on a lot of websites before I get to the one I want. And so the navigator just said, you call me and we'll walk through it together. And so, you know, she had the passwords, she had the usernames for that grandmother, which she was easily able to access. And now when they got to the home screen, the grandmother was like, okay, I'm on, I've got it. So it's just that caring adult, again, doing work differently. And we've got people doing it at scale, but we've also got people that grandmother knows. And so I think it just goes back to doing the place-based work, which for us started with one community in 1999. And I think Dream and I both always bring that up because as we talk about where we are today, there are folks out there that will think, but I am one funding stream. I've got one source of funding and this small pocket of students. That's where it starts. And if you're meeting those students' needs through the resources that you have, then you're fulfilling your mission in these times. And I'll just turn it back over to you at this point, Kathy. Thank you, and thank everyone so much for allowing us to share.
And Kathy, can I say one thing before you do that? I think what's, you know, it really is relationships. And I think the equity piece that we're seeing is that high poverty schools do not have enough teachers and enough staff and enough caring adults that are there for kids. How do we create an environment where every school would have college and career navigators, would have people that could work individually and in small groups with students? And so that's huge. The relationships have never been more important. And I think the other piece we're seeing is that as we think about this work, we're really, really worried about our students that are seniors this year that are planning to go to college. And so that's where our hearts are, and we're trying to figure out how to ensure their success.
Yeah, such a great point. I love the examples of the family stories you shared and to give us perspective that you didn't start at this scale. I think that's the thing that intimidates people a lot of times is they just think, you know, that kind of high touch, how can you really scale that? And yet you've demonstrated that you can. We're getting some great questions coming in. The first is, how does this information apply to Native American reservations?
So it's interesting. We've worked through our Rural College Access and Success Summit. We were going to hold that in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it should have been last week. We were actually going to highlight the similarities and also specific challenges that our Native communities face. My gut tells me, just from the relationships I've formed across the country with people doing similar work with that population, that rural America, especially high poverty, distressed rural America like Appalachia, is very, very similar to our Native communities. But I'm not an expert on that piece, but I do think it is translatable. Kathy, you're muted.
Thank you. Chelsea said, having a hard time getting students from Eastern Kentucky to want to come to the biggest city in Kentucky, which is Louisville. Any tips?
Oh, I think it's relationships. I think it's relationships, and the students are not going to be drawn by the city, and and they're definitely not going to be drawn by the University of Louisville Cardinals, because most of our kids are UK Wildcats at heart. What we found is we did do a program with the one of the schools there at the University of Louisville, where we brought students that were ninth graders to campus, and they spent a week there, and they were doing engineering work. It was the engineering school. And those students, that was 3 or 4 years ago, started wanting to go to U of L. So I think that colleges that are in urban areas have to realize that if they want to attract and retain rural students, it's getting them on your campuses early on, showing them how that's going to impact their career trajectory. It's also building the relationships with the families early on. And the University of Louisville was wonderful because they did that no cost, right? They provided their faculty and they provided that opportunity. And I think colleges and universities have to be willing to reach out to rural places and do that for the rural communities they want to attract students from.
Is there anything they should be doing differently in terms of integrating students who are coming from rural communities into that college community?
Sarah, you want to take that one? You've done more with first year stuff than me.
Yeah, thank you. I think, as I said, summer melt before they ever get there. And, you know, we have the stories of a student who just couldn't figure it out after they got there, and they just got in their car and left. I think our parents, and that's why that survey means so much to me, want their students to be successful. There's this misunderstanding out there that parents don't want their students to leave home. That's not true. And they don't necessarily want them to come back. They want them to be successful wherever that leads them to. But the students themselves will call home, and our parents will say, I know it's hard, baby. Do you want us to come get you? And so I think it's having the folks on those campuses stop that, to mitigate that, to be sure that whatever residence hall they're in is a residence hall that's designed for first generation students and students who may be homesick. There is a tremendous amount of pride in our communities where Sunday dinners are still a big thing, and we all go see our grandparents at the nursing home on weekends. And so there has to be something to fulfill that need for community for all of our students. And also, we don't need, we've done some work around this. This is interesting. We've done some post-secondary work, and one of the things that we tried was tried to find the regional campuses where most of our students attended and actually hire our staff or send staff to be on those campuses. And what we realized is we don't need more people on those college campuses. We need someone connecting them to the resources that are already there.
So yeah, great point. Great point. Just making sure they're getting that first gen experience. Allison shared that I feel broadband access is huge due to the new normal. It was always an issue, and now even more so. Anything you can think of on that front that you're doing to try and close that digital divide?
I think it's a time that rural people and rural communities across the country have to demand more of our elected officials to fund access and to fund broadband. And until we can get fiber and hardwired into all communities, what can we do to give schools the resources to get Wi-Fi and routers into the homes of kids? So I think it really is an opportunity for us all to speak loudly, to say that any stimulus package needs to include access to broadband, and thinking about end users and how the end users will have that opportunity.
Some interesting things I would share from a programmatic perspective. We have offices within all of our communities, and we've heard the stories of students, senior students in high school, who will drive to the offices, and although they're closed, they're in areas where you can park pretty close to the door, and they're accessing our office Wi-Fi to do assignments, especially those students who may be in dual credit classes and need to get they're doing this college work online anyway. And so we've thought a lot. We've got a STEM bus that we've retrofitted in one of our counties in deep eastern Kentucky. Can we now put some MiFi and all of that and park that bus in different locations throughout the summer? So we're trying to be creative, but as Dreama says, it's not something that can be fixed programmatically.
Sure, totally get it. Sylvie shared, what is the farthest students are coming for your celebration events? Physically getting students to events is a big challenge in rural Washington state.
I hear you. Dreama and I can talk about the first one. I wish I could pop up the picture of about 45 school buses, kids all in the same t-shirt for security reasons, coming across a huge big parking lot. So we've taken a local arena that usually does boat shows or country music or any kind of music venue. We fill that to capacity. And for some of our districts, it was a 2.5-hour drive to get there. So some of them came in with the videos playing and the bands performing. We try to stagger the college president videos. We also had the Commissioner of Juvenile Justice on stage, so we waited and did that last. We had the college president from Berea College deliver those messages when they were at the first one, and then again at the 6-year later mark. So some kids come in late and some have to leave. We serve lunch there. We've worked with different vendors. Dreama, I like the way that the first year you talked about if the arena isn't filled in 6 years. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the empty seats?
And I think so it's about a 2.5-hour drive on the school bus to where we could do an event that had, I think that year it was around 5,000 young people that were all 8th graders. And that's a real sacrifice because they spent twice as much time on the bus as they did really in the arena. And so it's something we only do twice. We do it in the 8th grade and we do it the senior year. But really the message for our staff when those 5,000 young people were in the room, if we did not turn the tide and increase retention, 25% of those young people would not be there 5 years later for 12th grade. And so it was really a moving piece for us to visually see it. And I think it let the kids see they were part of a movement. But we really, because of the distance, we don't do it more than twice for a 7-year period.
Great. Let's see. Kelly is sharing that I'm from a mining town in Wyoming where I can run into families and students who don't value education because they can make good money without any college education. I know there is mining in parts of Kentucky you guys are working with. How do you overcome this roadblock? And I don't think that's limited just to mining. We hear that in some of our communities as well.
So ours is a little different. So I would say, Kelly, you should look at what happened in Appalachia. The coal industry started collapsing about 5 years ago, and that's no longer true. And so I think that it's also scaffolding up for young people that, yes, they could get a good job in the mines that if they go to work immediately, but if they get that first degree or that first certification, and then if they start on a career pathway that's scaffolded up. But in our region now, there's no jobs, right? So that's not a question anymore. But I think for the places where there are good jobs, it really is thinking and working with the parents also. Because my dad was a construction worker, and that kills your body. So by the time you're 40, your body is already harmed. Getting parents and community members to share those stories too is important.
Yeah, great. Okay, how do you, I think we have time for one more question quickly. How do you identify potential summer melt students and what messages are you sending to them?
So there are you've got 1 minute. 1 minute.
Okay. So all of our students are summer melt students because 90% of our students are first generation low income, and that's really what you're looking for when you look for summer melt. The texting platform, our information is on the next slide, and you can reach out to me and I can connect you with our resources. It's kind of a week by week, month by month message that we send. And then Dreamy, will you talk about this one quickly?
Yeah, so if you're interested in learning about our Rural Summit, we were supposed to have done that last week. We're working with the Gear Up program and the Campus Compact program in New Hampshire to be in New Hampshire next year, and then Scottsdale with College Access Arizona in 2022. If you want to get on that mailing list. We're also looking at doing things since we had to cancel the summit, we had already planned over the next month, doing one thing each month around college access and success, where Sarah or I have somebody else on to do really what Kathy's inspired us that this works, and we want to do what FCAN is doing, but with that focus on rural. And so if you want to get on our mailing list, just shoot an email to this email address.
Okay, so I know we are running out of time and I want to respect people's time. We do have another couple of upcoming webinars, Closing the Opportunity Divide with Europe, and that is next week, and then Partnering for Success, Creating Educational Attainment That Works, and that's with the National Post-Secondary Strategy Institute. I know we didn't get to all the questions today, but I promise you I will pull the report afterwards and we will connect you to Sarah and to Dreama to make sure you get your questions answered. Finally, let me just say a profound thank you to Dreama and to Sarah for joining us today. As you can tell from the overwhelming response, there's just truly a hunger and a commitment among people to want to help our rural communities succeed and thrive. And we so appreciate all the work you've been doing to help figure out what works so that we can scale it to other parts of the country. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, and keep doing what you're doing, guys.
And many thanks to everyone who dialed in today. Your work is amazing. Stay safe, wash your hands, and we will get through this. Have a great afternoon. Take care.
Bye, guys.